My name is Rex Dutton, and this is Keegan Wilson, all the way from Australia. Yes, good to have you here.
Thank
Long
you.
trip. We're beginning a new series today. I think it's supposed to be like 12 lessons on this.
You think you're the one who designed this?
I think it's 12, and on heaven and setting your mind on things above. And so we've done a few different studies now, but Keegan particularly been excited about this study.
I'm really excited about this study because I don't think we discussed this enough. And we've been going through this book called Heaven by Randy Alcorn. And I just wanted to start off by reading something he starts off with, and so give us an idea of where we're heading with this. The sense that we will live forever somewhere has shaped every civilization in human history. Australian Aborigines pictured heaven as a distant island beyond the western horizon. The early Finns thought it was an island in the far away east. Mexicans, Peruvians, and Polynesians believed that they went to the sun or the moon after death. Native Americans believed that in their afterlife, their spirits would hunt the spirits of the buffalo. The Gilgamesh epic, an ancient Babylonian legend, refers to the resting place of heroes and hints at a tree of life. In the pyramids of Egypt, they embalmed bodies, had maps placed beside them as guides to the future world. The Romans believed that the righteous would picnic in the Elysian fields while their horses grazed nearby. Seneca, the Roman philosopher, said that the day thou farest as the last is the birthday of eternity. Although these depictions of the afterlife differ, their unifying testimony of the human heart throughout history is belief in life after death. Anthropological evidence suggests that every culture has a God-given innate sense of the eternal, that this world is not all there is. And I love how he starts that book, because essentially we all have a desire for heaven or, something after this. And as Christians, I've asked this question, and I've asked people, what's hell about? And people have given me these descriptive answers. Then I ask them what heaven's like, and I get nothing. And so I wonder why we're so focused on hell and not heaven. Do you come across this in Christian?
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know what we even think about heaven, because that's true. It's kind of crazy. I mean, it's like there are no thoughts about it, except that, I want to go to heaven. But there's not a lot of clear thinking about it. And that's kind of the reason we're doing this, is to help you do that. I mean, this series is entitled Heaven, but it sets your mind on things above. And so,
correct.
How do you do that and obey that scripture in Colossians if you don't think about it?
Yeah, Colossians 3:1 says, since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. It sounds like a command. The Greek word there is zeteo, which is, I don't know if that's right, but zeteo or something. But it essentially is the present tense of an ongoing investigation. Keep seeking, keep looking, keep striving for this, intently seeking. And so to set our minds on Christ, who's seated at the right hand of God in heaven, should we not be thinking about heaven and heavenly things?
I think so, but I got a joke. Can I tell a joke?
No.
I have a joke, because I think heaven is treated like a MacGuffin, and the old MacGuffin joke is, so these two British guys get on a train, and one's got a big package underneath his arm. And as they meet, the one guy says to the other guy, and they're both British guys, and says, well, what's in the parcel? And the other guy says, well, it's a MacGuffin. And the other guy says, well, what's a MacGuffin? He says, well, it's a MacGuffin is a small animal with a long yellow tail, its spotted tail, and it's used for hunting tigers in New York. And the guy says, but there aren't any tigers in New York. He said, but this isn't a real MacGuffin. And that's the joke. So a MacGuffin, to understand, it's a tool that's used in Hollywood, in movies, and in books and stories. And it's the idea that it's something everybody's trying to obtain, but it has no other purpose, and so you don't describe it in detail. You see it in a lot of different movies. You've seen it in Mission Impossible 3 when they're trying to get the rabbit's foot.
Yeah.
And nobody knows what it is, but you got to get it. And that's the reason, I don't know if you remember the movie where Ethan has to go on top of this, swing around and get to the top of that building. And they don't show you what happens inside the building. You know, he comes out fighting and he ends up swinging back around.
Yeah.
Right. So reason that you're not allowed to see is because the writers had no idea what a MacGuffin in that. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what the rabbit's foot was going to be yet. And so they made a thing that he could carry and that would roll. And that's all they did. It looked kind of like one of those pneumatic things that come out of your bank. And so that's all it was. And so you see that a lot in movies. They'll talk about, oh, he's got the chip out of the computer, or he's got the, what do they call those things where you get all this information on it?
Key card? I don't know.
Yeah, key card. It could be that. It could be a document. It could be a rolled up piece of paper. It doesn't matter what it is. You're never allowed to see what it is, and you're never allowed to know much about it. It's like that TV show Lost. I mean, in the TV show Lost, nobody knew what was going on in that movie, and neither did the people who were writing it. J.J. Abrams was a part of making that movie, and there's nothing in it. And so the idea is that you don't have to know what the thing is that everybody's trying to get. You just have to know that everybody's trying to get it. And that's why heaven is so much like a MacGuffin to most people. Most people have no knowledge about heaven, but everybody wants to go there. They've not studied it. They've not looked at it. They don't know what it's about, except it's supposed to be great. That's all they know. And it's like we're in this big movie, right? And everybody knows the hell thing. They talk about it, but nobody knows the heaven thing. And yet we're all trying to get there. Like, this is the thing. This is the plot.
Yeah, there's a good analogy. Yeah, if you and I worked for NASA for years and we trained up to go to Mars, and we're getting ready.
They definitely would not go to Mars if you and I were working.
But we're getting ready, and the launch date comes, and you and I are sitting in the space rocket, and off we go. We fire off, and we're in the air, and I look at you and I say, "So what's Mars like?" And you look at me and say, I don't know. We never studied that. We never looked at that. It seems so bizarre that we would even, do something like that, because that's what we're essentially doing. We're on this planet. We're, living this life, and we're striving for heaven, but we have no idea what heaven's about.
So let's say you became a Christian when you're like a teenager.
Yeah.
And you're in your 30s, right? And you don't know. And then you're in your 40s and you've never looked at it. And then you're in your 50s, you've never looked at it. 60s, you never looked at it. 70, you're 90 years old, about to die, and you've never even studied what heaven might be like. Now, isn't that the oddest thing? And it's worse. It's like the MacGuffin in that, you can't know.
Yeah. We get told this we're not supposed to know. We see it in, I think it's Isaiah, that, God's things are greater than ours.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't know about heaven. What He has given us, He has given us. And we can extrapolate from the scriptures what heaven is like, right? Yeah,
but here's the really strange thing. That's a good point. Now, I agree with you completely. You're right.
So again? You're right.
I can't repeat it. I'm joking. But no, I mean, you're right. But fundamentally, the problem with that is that I've run over and over again, I hear people say, you can't know. So you're not allowed to know, they think, so they never study it. That's bizarre to me. And in fact, when you start pointing out what the Bible does say, they start saying things like, you don't know that. Or, that's just figurative.
Yeah, I want to come back to that because that's, actually, we're going to talk about it in the next lesson with location, but that allegorical assumption that we just put it down to allegory or sort of parable or something. But sometimes it might just be a fact. That's what it's like.
The problem is that it looks like we don't really want to know. So not only do we want to go there, we don't really want to know what it's like.
Okay, I got some examples here because these are theologian writers that have written these books. So, Nature and Destiny of Man, theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, he writes a 2-volume set, nothing about heaven, right? The Destiny of Man, the topic is Destiny of Man, doesn't write anything about heaven. Another book, Dogmatic Theology by William Shedd, he writes 3 volumes, 87 pages are allocated to hell and punishment, 2 pages are allocated to heaven. Great Doctrines of the Bible by Martin Lloyd.
I bet he was dogmatic about those 2 pages, though.
The Great Doctrines of the Bible. 2 pages are assigned to the eternal state in the new earth. Systematic Theology, Louis Berkhoff. 38 pages to creation, 40 pages to baptism and communion, 2 pages to hell, and 1 to heaven. He has a 737, no, sorry, it was more. It was like 900-page book. And on page 737, it's 1 little piece about heaven. And I find that absolutely bizarre.
You didn't want to be verbose.
Our desire to discuss the details of heavenly existence remains a low priority amongst Christians.
And that in and of itself is the biggest mystery about it.
It's
that nobody's interested.
No, it's weird. I want to know what's coming.
I mean, but these are scholars. These are the guys that are supposed to have read the Bible. They're supposed to know, why aren't we talking about it? I mean, if I'm supposed to set my affections on things above.
How do you do that?
How do you do that?
If I don't know what it's about. So
you were making a good illustration before we started about going to Johannesburg. If you
yeah. So, yeah. Well, the idea is that you and I have been in South Africa. A lot of people who are watching possibly haven't been to South Africa.
Oh.
But if they asked you, what's it like? You're going to say it's different.
Yeah, I'd say I lived in a hut out in the, no.
Rode the elephants to school and all that stuff. But you're going to say it's different.
I almost got eaten by a lion one day.
It was a MacGuffin. But you would say it's different.
The MacGuffin killed it, actually.
But it's the same, right? The MacGuffin killed it. It's different, but it's the same. And when people inquire about how it's different, you can use examples in America as a reference to explain what you experienced.
Right. We drove cars there. Y'all know what a car? Yeah. They have cars. That means they have roads there.
But you can extrapolate on that. And the same idea is coming from that is that we have been given certain things in the Bible and things around us that we can know are very similar.
So you're saying that God would naturally take what we know and try to explain that from what's here?
Well, yes, obviously I'm saying that, but let's put it in a question form. Will heaven be completely different and almost unrecognizable as to what we have here?
But here's the thing.
Does that even make sense?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So now let's imagine God's making the world. So this is not, in other words, this is not God A making the world and God B making the world. There's a God making the world, the only God there is. And so he makes the world. He makes the world any way he wants. Right. And so here's the question. Why would he make this world so different from the world we're going to in the sense of the good things? And why would he, in other words, so now he's going to speak to you about the next world. Wouldn't he more likely make the next world similar to this world so that when we transition, we're not panicked?
We're not panicked. It's familiar. And that really comes back to, it seems illogical that, well, it seems like a waste of time, this. If the next world is completely different, what are we learning here? What are we actually doing?
Well, it also is suggestive that he didn't think what he did here was very good. And yet we know he said it was good.
Yeah.
So the idea that the next world has to be so different that nobody would recognize it and that he could not use, so it also implies that he didn't think this through. In other words, so that when he does describe it and he used this world things to describe that there, that he's being almost deceptive because he hasn't told you the way it really is because you can't handle it. But wait, now he made us to handle this and to handle that, whatever that is. That isn't even logical. So it's also not logical for God to make it so radically different that there'd be no parallels to me tell you what Johannesburg is like.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay, let's go a little bit further, because here's the other misconception that I hear a lot, is that we will not know each other in heaven, right? Now, why bother with this whole thing? Why bother with relationship and experience and lessons,
right,
if we're not going to have something that's familiar and we're not going to know the people
right.
that we know here?
Well, imagine if you were a child.
And this is a good example. Yeah.
So you're a child and you die as a child. And we all believe, Matthew 18, that their angels do always behold the face of God. They're okay. If you want to be in the kingdom of God, you have to become like a child. So children go to heaven. This business about children are born in sin and therefore they're lost, that's just not biblical. So they are, sure, they do wrong, but they're safe. They're okay. God's saving the kids. We got no problem. So children go to heaven. Now he's, 5 years old. All he's known is his mommy and his daddy. And he's old enough to kind of figure things out. So we're not talking about a baby. We're talking about 1, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years old. And now suddenly he appears in this world and nothing looks like this. Yeah. And he doesn't know anybody there, including he does not know his mommy or his daddy or his uncle or his auntie or anybody. He doesn't know anything about this. It would be a terror. Now,
welcome to heaven.
Right. And you say, well, God would just give him all the knowledge he needs, except who he was.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
No. So he gives him all this knowledge so he can accept it, but he doesn't know who he was and what happened here.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for this. I know why people want to believe this. It's the hell thing.
Yeah, that's a good point, because then if you don't know, you're not going to be upset that you lost a friend or a loved one or something.
But that's another step.
That's an emotional argument. But I was also looking and I was thinking to answer this question as well, that when we see Saul and Samuel in that story where Samuel comes back from the dead and has a chat with Saul, Saul recognizes Samuel. Sure. Right? The Mount of Transfiguration, the disciples recognized Elijah and Moses.
Well, that had to be name tags, that. I mean, you'd never seen them before, right?
Correct. So how did they know it was them?
Probably their names tattooed on their forehead. I don't know.
Or they just came, hey guys, I'm Moses. I don't know. But the fact is, they're still who they were on earth.
Right.
That's still the rich man recognizes.
So do you reckon Moses remembers who he was on earth?
I would think so.
Or he's just named Moses and he's the guy that we're all going to call Moses, but he doesn't remember this story. So we get to heaven and we don't remember any of the biblical stories. That becomes a problem because the word of God endures forever, right? Okay. So everybody that's in the Bible, right? All those stories will just be there, but nobody will know who they were that did that.
It seems like a waste. It seems like
it doesn't. Waste. It not only seems like a waste, it seems like a lie.
Yeah.
It's a lie. That you could live in this world and not remember who you were, and now you're either being punished or rewarded, and you don't have no idea why. You're in heaven, you got no knowledge or understanding of what happened in your story and why you're there. That's ridiculous. Yeah. That can't be true. But now,
and then when we talk about rewards, then it's essentially not a reward because you have no idea.
There are no rewards.
You don't even know what it is that you've received.
There can be no rewards if there can be no identity. There's no point unless you have identity.
No judgment if there's no identity.
Nothing. There's nothing. You stand before the judgment seat of Christ to receive the things done in the body, and you don't know whose body it was.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy that we even have that idea.
Now, if we got into that, I mean, there's a lot of things we could get into there. Maybe we need to back up just a little bit now and just think on, so the idea is the idea of wanting to go. Why do we want, what's the attraction to heaven?
That was my next question, but in this form, because this is the other misconception, will we just sit on a cloud with a harp and sing songs for eternity? Will we be in a constant worship service?
Well, not if you're Church of Christ. You won't be sitting there with a harp. But yes, we'll be there for an eternity.
Sure.
And so
But this,
I'm thinking you've got time for more than just that.
yeah. Well, you'd think so, because this sounds very boring. In fact, this sounds like a prison sentence if we're just sitting on a cloud and just singing a song for eternity, right?
It doesn't sound like a reward.
Well, no. I mean, the
And
idea of death sounds.
it's not really reflective of the scriptures either. And that's the thing you've got to realize. It's just not and here's another thing. And it bothers me that you could be a Christian all these years and not even take time to look.
Yeah.
And then when you do look and you're in a Bible class, okay? And this is a Bible class. Everybody, hello. So we're actually going to look at a few things in the Bible. So you could look at things that it says and your immediate response is, oh, you can't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that just drives me nuts. So I start showing you, we're going to show you some scriptures, some things the Bible says, and you just say, oh, you can't know that. Well, what have you read? I got nothing but the scriptures. So I'm going with God isn't a liar.
That's a good point.
And I'm going to go with, he's the one that described it. Okay? He's the one that told me what Johannesburg is like.
Yeah.
Okay? He's also the one that made this world. So he gave me the parallels. He's the one that did this. And you, the intellectual, says, oh, but you can't know. Well, it doesn't sound real intellectual to me. So whatever I don't care if it seems babyish. The only logical thing to do is be attracted to what God said was attractive. And pay attention to what he said would attract us there. So one of the things that happens, like in Matthew 13, when anyone hears the word of God and does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches away that was sown in his heart. I think that's what happens on this subject. I think it's of the devil. Nobody reads it. And when they do read it, they immediately don't give it any thought. And the next thing you know, they're not even thinking about it. And next thing you know, it's not even a doctrine in the church almost. It's almost to the point of nobody actually believes there is a real heaven.
That's a good point. Yeah. And it gets snatched away from us is what we're essentially saying.
And another thing too is this idea that you just cannot grasp it. So the Bible's written on like a fifth grade education. If you can't grasp it, there's a problem. I think you're okay anyway. You're going to heaven no matter what. You can grasp what it says about it. And you can believe what it says about it. In fact, we're actually told, see that you do not refuse him who speaks. Hebrews 12:25. Quit writing off what the Bible says about a thing. I don't know. There's a lot I could say about that, but fundamentally, it really bothers me when people who claim to believe the Bible don't read the Bible about probably the most important thing in your life, which is not this life, but the next. And we don't even read about it.
I want to maybe bring an example up there to maybe expand on that. In Revelation chapter 22, I think it's verse 4 or something, it talks about a tree in heaven that sustains us.
Tree of life.
Yeah. But now, that must obviously be a completely different tree, right? I've never seen it, and that's what we're getting at here. I've never seen it, but I'm now saying, well, it can't be a tree. That's just an allegory.
I don't know if you know this. You'll appreciate this. Nobody else here will appreciate this, but you know what one of the theories of what the tree of life looked like, right? A baobab.
Okay.
Now y'all won't know that. It's a fat, kind of funny tree. Looks like it's upside down.
Yeah.
The roots are the
other way.
The other way. Yeah. So, but the idea that a tree's not a tree.
Yeah. It's crazy.
It's bizarre.
Exactly. And that's why, so when God says there's a tree there, what's so difficult about believing that there's a tree there?
Right.
I haven't seen it.
No, it's got to be a metaphor. No, but you don't understand, Keegan. It's got to be a metaphor for something else. Because it can't be a real tree.
Yep.
And it can't be a real fruit. It cannot be that.
Yeah.
Why can't it be that? Well, God's a spirit.
Yeah.
So since God's a spirit, everything there is ethereal. Everything there is a spirit. There are no tangible things in heaven.
Yeah.
So what is heaven? Is it just water? It's just liquid and blue
It's
color water mixing with red and sometimes with yellow water and just
it's all
slush.
spiritual. We'll come back to that. But on the same example, yeah, it's the tree of life stands next to a river. I know what a river is because
You
God
can't know what a river is, Keegan.
because God has given us a river.
No, you can't know what a river is. You can't know what a tree is, and it can't mean a river and a tree.
So for those who don't understand sarcasm, just in case, but we've been given these things on earth, and God has explained these things to us that we can expect to see a river. I'm expecting to see a tree. I'm expecting to see a mountain. I'm expecting to see a tree
All
of
right,
gold.
here's a parallel. Let me ask you this, folks. Garden of Eden was called the paradise of God, right?
Yeah.
Were there real trees there? Were there real rivers there?
Yeah.
Were there real plants there? And were there real people there? And were there real animals there? But obviously that's just a metaphor. None of that was real. There wasn't really an Adam. There wasn't really an Eve. And Adam really wasn't put to sleep. And a rib wasn't really taken out of his side. Those are just symbols of something far more mystical that we cannot imagine.
And just to have a disclaimer there, you obviously...
I'm like, but it's so bizarre that somebody
bizarre.
could actually think that way.
It is bizarre.
I mean, granted, could there be some meanings that I haven't picked up? Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And do I think the next world will be less or more complicated than here? Far more complicated. Far, 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 far more complicated. Yes, I believe that. Why? Because we are beyond this and we are into understanding higher level things. Yeah, sure. God's a spirit. Yeah,
I was thinking of Paul in Corinthians, I think it's 12, where he talks about going to the third heaven, and he's saying there were things that were told there that I cannot talk about.
Right.
And so there's obviously stuff that's more complicated to add to your point.
Or stuff that we're just not meant to know in this world.
Sure. But it doesn't mean it's so completely different. Okay, so let's come back to the subject.
Well, it was a language. And he heard things said.
Exactly, yeah. And he recognized people.
Right. And so when God speaks to someone, when God speaks to someone, does he speak to them in a language? Is it words and concepts that a man can understand?
It's order, not chaos.
So who created man's mouth and tongue and ability to know language and to think through these things? And so he creates the scenario to understand the next scenario. Well, if it's that different, he didn't do a very good job, did he?
Almost like preparing us or something.
Yeah, it's almost like this teaches us about that. But if it doesn't, and there's no parallel, he didn't do a very good job, did he? That's kind of poor quality work.
And that's not God at all.
Of course not.
And I want to come back to this because we're running out of time here. But let's try and talk about physical and spiritual. What's the difference between the two? Because so often we separate the two and have different ideas of different paths, I guess, with the two meanings. But could they not be joined together?
Well, first of all, something a little more fundamental. There is this idea that God created everything from absolutely nothing. But the Bible really doesn't say that. It says he made the world of things that do not appear. You cannot see them.
Things that are unseen.
But it doesn't mean it's not real. It's like when we talk about miracles. Miracles are things we don't understand how it was done. But it doesn't mean it wasn't done through a real method. And so when we come to a spirit, we think of a spirit as if it's not really there. But a spirit really is there. I am talking to your spirit and soul even now. And it really is there. And so is your body. And your body is not more there than your spirit. And your spirit is not more there than your body. This table is not less here because it's not my spirit.
Cool.
It is the creation of God.
Correct, yeah.
It exists and it's made of things that cannot be seen. And physics teaches us that now. So when we talk about a spiritual body, it does not mean it's ethereal, that it's a nothing or a gas.
Floating around, yeah.
It's not what it means.
There's going to be, there will be object. He talks about sitting at the table with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob in heaven. It seems like there's going to be a table that we're sitting at, something I can touch, feel, see.
Of course not. It can't be that.
So that's in a sense physical.
Of course.
But we go, oh no, it's spiritual. So
okay. So they talk about in 1 Corinthians, Paul says there is a spiritual body and there is a natural body.
Yes.
And so people think, well, then a spiritual body is not of this in the sense of being natural material. Mm-hmm. That's where they go. But spiritual, every other place in the Bible means motivated by the Spirit of God. So if we have a spiritual body, Romans 8 makes it very clear. Yeah. This body has not yet attained to the redemption of the body. That's the reason we still struggle with our body sinning. But in the next world, it will be fully redeemed and we won't struggle. That's a spiritual body. So this body, it's raised. Exactly. This body is raised. It is tangible because it's raised. It's probably different, capable of doing other things, but it's still this body. After it's been eaten by worms and burned, whatever happens to it, it's raised. Well, how does God do that? I have no idea, but God knows how he's doing it, okay? And it's not a miracle to him because he knows how to do it.
And it infers a continual physical...
something
sense.
Tangible.
Something tangible.
It's a tangible thing that's real, and it's not less real than this or more real than this, but it's real. That is eternal. This is temporary. That's the difference. And this is sinful, and that's not. That's the difference between spiritual and not spiritual. That's the only difference I know. I know that. You can talk about anything you want, but I know the difference between natural and spiritual is.
So let's say spiritual is everlasting.
Everlasting.
Physical is temporary.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it's not tangible.
Right. But if you're a spiritual person, that means you're led by the Spirit of God.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so a spiritual body is one that doesn't fight the Spirit of God. It works with him. And that's a resurrected state. So,
and that's how we can worship in spirit and in truth.
Absolutely.
Because we have that aspect to us too.
And so there is a tangible. And so you can look forward to heaven as a real thing and you can start studying. Let me encourage you to start studying it.
This is the last point. Everybody, like you say, has more invested in heaven than they do here on earth. Right? We store up our treasures in heaven. We're all looking forward to this, and yet we don't even know what heaven is like, or we don't even know how to describe it, or we don't even think about it. And so, to add to your point, we should be encouraging each other to study more about what to expect and how to set our minds on it.
Yeah, how do you have a treasure in heaven if there's not a heaven and there's not a treasure?
Yeah, I don't know.
So yeah, we should focus more on heaven. So please start reading something about heaven. You might even have some questions about heaven. We're going to be dealing with about 11 more topics on this point.
Yeah, so this is a good book called Heaven by Randy Acorn, and we're slowly going through it. Next week, we're going to talk about location of heaven, which is going to be an interesting topic, and we're going to explore the possible location of heaven.
Yeah, we'll show you right where it is.
GPS location. All right, thanks for joining us. See you next time.